Welcome to the podcast. Eric is the autobiography of my grandfather, Eric Langridge. His story opens up in central London in 1925. So another day dawned, and it was decision time yet again. Do we go to school or bunk off? The entrance to the school was right opposite our house, so we would cross the road to the gate, turn and wave to Mum and go in. This was a side entrance, and so once we got in and out of sight, we would cross the playground and out the front gate into the main Kennington Park Road. It was a very busy road, and in those days there were no zebra crossings or traffic lights, but there was always a policeman on point duty controlling the traffic. As soon as a crowd was waiting to cross the road, he would stop the cars and we would cross. Only, knowing we shouldn't have been there, we would mingle with the adults and look like a family. We had our milk money, so we were heading for the underground trains. For a penny each, we could board a train, and by changing trains and never coming up to the surface, we didn't meet ticket collectors and could stay down all day. The idea was to pick up all the cigarette cards that had been thrown away. Sometimes we would find money or sweets or even sandwiches that had been left behind. Eventually we came up and would join our mates for a game in the park. Laurel bushes were growing here in abundance, and they made very good dens or hiding places. There were also very good trees here that made good climbing possible. We used to tear and run about all day, playing cowboys and Indians and sometimes getting very rowdy. So much so that we were eventually chased out of the park by the park keeper. It was on such an occasion as this that I climbed up a tree to jump over the fence, but I slipped and became impaled on a rail point. I was lifted off by the keeper and rushed to the doctors. I still have a scar on my rear to this day. Naturally, I limped about for a day or two, but amongst my mates, I was a hero. Saturday was always a very good day for us as kids, and it usually meant going to the cinema, depending on how much the money flow was going. We would get 6p each, which meant 2p to get into the cinema and 4p for our dinners. The cinema was a bit of a flea pit, and we used to call it the Scratch and Laugh. They used to put on special films for the Saturday morning kiddies club. There would be a cowboy film with Roy Rogers, or Tom Mix, which ran in episodes for several weeks. Also Charlie Chan or Rin Tin Tin. The comedy shows were usually Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton. There were silent films accompanied by a woman playing a piano at the foot of the stage. This poor woman became a regular target for toffee wrappers or peanuts. The missiles came showering across from all over the cinema. Every Saturday morning there would be a break in the show when a photographer would appear on stage to take a picture of the audience. The idea being that the kid with the best smile would win a prize. The photo was shown on the screen the following week, and the winner would have a circle around his head. The trouble was that the flash used in those days was a powder that he ignited, and there was such a flash and a bang that most of us finished with a terrified look on our faces. We never won it. If the film was good and we could get away with it, we would stay in, seeing the films over and over again until we got fed up with it. Now it was time to go and search for our dinner. It would either be the fish and chip shop or the pie and ale shop. Either place would give us a good meal for our 4p. Or we might even buy a big bag of chips between us and still have a penny or two for sweets. The chips would always have a bit of crackling in them, or broken bits of fish and plenty of salt and vinegar. We always had a good feed. There was a very good little sweet shop we passed on the way home, which was really the front room of a little cottage. A little old lady ran this shop, and we used to look forward to meeting her as she did us. We could buy 10 aniseed balls for a penny, or 2 gobstoppers. There were also the best dips, licorice bootlaces, or Tom Thumb mixture, which were tiny little pearl-like sweets that meant you got hundreds for a penny. We usually finished up with red and black licorice laces and 10 aniseed balls so we could share half each. On the days we didn't go to the cinema, We would stay local, running errands and fetching coke or firewood, so that we earned money for Mum to take us to the market in the afternoon. By now our carts had been changed by our dad, and having four pram wheels became a box cart. It had a long plank of wood as its base, and an orange box to sit in or carry loads. The front wheels were on a spindle, and they were steered by a rope held by the rider. The plank was extended at the back, so that the pusher, having gotten up a good speed, could step on and ride. These became quite competitive machines, and the dads were quite proud of their handiwork, especially when we held races. Each cart was different, but they were all made quite strongly, so they were quite capable of carrying heavy loads. We also made our own scooter using scrap wood scrounged from the building sites. There were two pieces of board used, one for the platform and the other for the front upright. A block of wood was nailed to the base at the front with two eye hooks screwed in about 4 inches apart. Another two eye bolts were screwed into the upright to line up with the others, and with a long bolt dropped down through them formed a hinge for steering. A piece of pole or broomstick was nailed across the top of the upright for a handle. The wheels were bull race bearings from a garage or motor scrapyard. A V-cut was placed into the base of the upright and the rear of the platform, made big enough to take the bull race. A piece of block would be hammered through the center of the race so that it was very tight and then nailed to the V-cuts. They were very sturdy little machines and gave us hours of fun. Then came Saturday afternoon and Mum would take us off to the market. It was always exciting being with Mum because we knew that if she had any money to spare, we would be in for a treat. She had a good eye for a bargain and would always bid for the lowest price. Perhaps there would be a pair of shoes for one of the girls or a pair of boots for one of us boys. There might be a pair of sandals, a jersey or dresses. All would be second-hand, of course. She would take us into a cafe, and if she hadn't bought anything else, we would have a drink and a bun. We would stroll up and down looking for bargains until it became dusk, and some of the stalls would be packing up. And then the stall holders would be selling off their wares to get rid of them, and great bargains could be had for a few pence, such as lumps of meat or fish and vegetables. We used to end the day feeling quite proud of our day out in and the bargains we had found. After tea, Mum would spend part of the evening cleaning and preparing the meat or fish for meals for the next few days. Bearing in mind that there were no fridges then, food had to be cooked well, hoping it would keep for a few days in our so-called cold room. I don't ever remember eating bad food or being ill from having done so. Flies were the biggest problem, and the only means of catching them was by hanging sticky flypaper from the ceiling, which became black with flies in no time at all. Next day was Sunday, which meant that in the morning we would be scrubbed clean, put into our best clothes. Although we were not allowed out, woe betide us if we got dirty or spoiled our clothes. Dad would be working at the pub until dinner time, and when we had our meal we would be sent out to play, or more often than not, sent to Sunday school. This used to be another source of being given food which helped Mum to feed us all. After Sunday school there was always lemonade and cakes for us all. Sometimes not enough children would turn up, so there was food left over, which meant that if we stayed long enough, we would be sent home with a bag full of bits and pieces. We also learned that by becoming regulars, we could be included in the Sunday school outings. We would visit the Salvation Army too and be invited to Christmas parties or their outings. We did this more or less as a matter of survival. The church officers knew this and accepted it as such. They were very kind people to us on our street, not only in their gifts of food parcels, but also in their help for clothing, whether by goods or vouchers to put towards the purchase of clothes. Sunday was also the day that we were visited by all the street vendors. One would be the fisherman with his two-wheeled barrow on which he had trays of cockles, whelks, shrimps or winkles. They were usually about twopence a pint, and we would all ask for winkles. We sat around the table with the winkles in a bowl at the center of the table and would help ourselves to them. We each had a pin and would extract each morsel accompanied by bread and margarine and a cup of tea. Delicious. If it wasn't to be a fish tea, there was always the muffin man on his way. He walked about with a large tray on his head loaded with crumpets. He also rang a loud handbell to announce his presence. The crumpets were 5 for a penny, and Mum would often get 10. We would sit in front of the fire with a wire toasting fork, cooking each one as we wanted. Sunday meals were always different from the rest of the week. Our street was always busy with various street vendors, as we were quite near the main roads. Most of them had barrows or a horse and cart. There was the rag and bone man who had a horse and cart. He was always great fun to watch. He had his own particular call, which he would shout to let the women know he was about. They would gather anything they wanted to get rid of, from clothing, ornaments, old saucepans, or bits of old iron, for which he would give them a few pennies or a goldfish in a jar. On the side of the cart he had a series of sacks hanging, and as he got them he would sort the clothes into each bag. He also had a couple of tins nailed to the cart, which he would sort the buttons, especially the mother of pearl ones. They were worth quite a bit of money. He would also often have old bedsteads on board. Nothing was ever refused. His horse and its harness were absolutely immaculate, and these were his pride and joy, but they were made to work quite hard and had very long days. Another man that used to come around was the cat's meat man. He had a 2-wheeled barrow on which there were large lumps of horse meat, cooked and ready for slicing. He was very popular and for a few pence would carve several slices of meat placed on a wooden skewer. He had his regular customers, and they didn't always have cats. We could imagine the meat being used for meals or sandwiches. If we knew the kids who had this meal, we used to tease them about it. Then there was the coal man who had quite a large horse and cart loaded with coal. He used to shout aloud, 2 bob 500, which meant 2 shillings for 500 weight. He had a large leather hat on, which stretched right down his back, enabling him to carry 100 weights of coal and tip it into a bunker over his shoulder. He also had a strap around his trouser leg to stop the dust rising up. His big horse had brass bells on its harness and ribbons tied into his mane and his tail, a magnificent sight. There was a very strange man that used to arrive in the street and stand outside the school gate. He was the Indian toffee man, and he had an aluminum box on straps hung around his shoulders. He used to make little cones of paper into which he would put a toffee straw substance. This was very sticky, sweet, and popular. It was much like today's candy floss. He was dressed in a long robe and wore a turban. He never spoke. At the end of our street was a huge marble trough containing water for the horses. The men would time it so that they had their lunches at the same time, and the horses would have their feed in their nose bags. We used to stand there quite fascinated, watching the beasts fill in their mouths full of fresh water and allowing it to dribble from their huge fleshy lips. They also liked to stand quite contentedly, munching at their oats, and it was surprising to see how quickly the sparrows arrived to pick up any oats that may be spilt. All these people were a great part of our learning, and helped us to learn about many things going on around us. Such a chap was the old gent who pulled a barrel organ around. It was built like a piano on wheels, except that it was played by turning a handle. The tunes were all favourite music hall songs, and he was very popular with the passers-by. Sometimes, while he would have his lunch break, usually a bottle of beer and a sandwich, he would let us turn the handle. We also looked forward to seeing the knife grinder arrive. He had a huge box barrow on 2 wheels, which had 2 sturdy legs under the hand shafts. In the centre of the hollow box was a huge stone wheel, and a smaller one much finer. Also there were shelves around the side of the cart holding his tools of trade. He would place a plank of wood across the shafts and sit on it to tread all the wheel around, much like an old sewing machine, to sharpen knives, scissors, and even garden shears. He would also do minor repairs and charge about 6 pennies for 3 or 4 items. All of the vendors were very kind people, especially to us kids. They were always polite, and would pass the time of day with the mums and listen to all their worries. After all, they were all in the same boat and striving to make an honest living. Once again, our wanderings took priority over our schooling, and we would trot off to find new places for adventure. One such place was the muddy embankment of the River Thames. In those days, the river was controlled only by the tidal waves that entered from the sea, so that at low tide muddy parts would be exposed to all and sundry. Hence came the name Mudlarks. We would spend our time padding up and down, picking up bits of wood or metal for scrap. If we found an old bag, we would fill it with lumps of coal we had found. We would climb up and onto barges that had floundered on the mud, at least until the owners saw us and drove us away. By the end of the day, our legs and trousers were covered in smelly mud and effluent that had flowed into the Thames. Our mum was absolutely livid, more so with the shame of us walking past the neighbours dressed like that. These escapades of ours became very exasperating for our mum and dad. We were causing many rows between them as mum always took our side. There were also more and more visits from the school truant officer, which made dad very angry with us. Our treatment from them started to become harsher. We would be escorted to the school by mum or dad and handed over to the head teacher. At the end of the day, we would be met at the gate, and would be taken home. Then our top clothes were taken away so that we had to stay indoors in vest and pants. This went on for quite some time. We decided it would be best for us if we settled down to our schooling and tried to learn something. We even stayed there long enough to be included in the school outing. This was to be a pram ride from Kennington to the end of the line at Clapham Common. There we would be turned loose and encouraged to join in sports activities. It was a very good day out, but the temptation was there to wander off. We thought of our restrictions and decided not to yield to that temptation. It was quite a new experience for us to ride on a tram. These big old lumbering iron monsters clanked their way along the tracks. On the front was a huge brass bell that the driver would clang noisily at junctions, and whenever anyone got in our way, we all scrambled to the top deck, but having done so, we felt the thing would tip over, so on the way we made sure we got on the ground level. Every year in November there was a pageant held called the Lord Mayor's Show. It is now internationally famous. In our days, it was mostly just horse-drawn vehicles, although there may have been a few old-fashioned motor vehicles. The street refuse vehicles in those days were huge wooden dust carts drawn by 2 large horses. They were very deep, and on the top of the sides were shelves sloped inwards so that all the litter thrown in would fall to the bottom of the cart. On this day of the year, the carts were scrubbed clean and disinfected, the paintwork was spotless, and the horse harnesses polished to perfection. All of the kids in our area were invited to the depot yard and offered a ride in the carts. A platform had been built along the inside of the cart so that we could stand up on it and see over the high sides. It was a wonderful experience, and as we passed along the streets, we all had little flags to wave at the crowd. It was carnival time, and the people really joined in. The procession went from our streets, through the embankment, and finally past the Lord Mayor on his platform at Mansion House. Then it would head back to the yard, where a huge street party was laid out. It was the highlight of our year. The next big event to take place was when we were informed that our big old house was next in line to be demolished. This meant we had to be rehoused into a block of flats that had been specially built. We now had a 3-bedroom flat, which meant that we boys now had our own bedroom, the girls had theirs, and Mum and Dad were in the largest bedroom. There was a separate dining room, a kitchen, a scullery, and a lovely new bathroom with a spotlessly clean toilet. Mum was overjoyed with it. With Dad's help, they set about to make it a truly wonderful new home. Dad applied to the Salvation Army and other organizations that had been set up to assist in such situations. We had lots of new furniture, curtains, and utensils. We didn't bring anything from the old house. It was especially nice to have comfortable beds with soft mattresses, sheets, pillows, and blankets. There was even a dining table with enough chairs for us all, and a sofa with 2 fireside chairs. In the kitchen, Mum had electricity for lighting and cooking. Her copper was heated by gas. There was no more smelly smoke or ash from wood fires, and the fire in the living room was more modern and burnt the best coal. It was a new way of life for us, and we were quite proud to tell people where we lived. This time, we were on the posh end in a new building. We even tried to mind our ways and attended school more regularly, that is, until summer holidays, and then we realized what we were missing. We became so accustomed to being out playing all day and staying out late at night that we found it difficult to go back to school again. We became more truant, wandered for miles, got lost and brought home by the police. It was causing a lot of trouble for Mum and Dad. The visits from officials were becoming more frequent. Then, one dreadful day when we did get home, we learned that Mum had gone for a holiday and would never be coming back.